Hello everybody, my name is Mike Snow and welcome back to the Dark Souls Barbarian build. I'm going to give a very unbarbaric bow right here. And we're going to be doing the City of the Gods, Anor Londo today. I'm going to be using the Man-Serpent Greatsword, which I've beefed up to +10, and this weapon just wrecks face. It is amazing. I can pretty much two-shot the Sentinels here with an R2. And this part of the game is absolutely gorgeous. It is brilliantly designed. It is very vertical. You can see all the way up and down through various points here. That first one missed, but you can easily loop around them. I wanted to talk about, at the beginning here, how great these Sentinel enemies are, because they are very tough when you first come across them. They can be very, very dangerous, and usually you can avoid them. Now, recently I'm coming off playing Bloodborne, and when I was playing that game, I ran into some trouble. There are a number of enemies, one in particular I'm thinking of, that are huge, just monstrously large enemies that hit like a truck, that have a lot of hit points, and yet they are also extremely fast and can attack multiple times in a row. And I really dislike that. I want to make it clear that Bloodborne is a fantastic game, but I think Dark Souls is superior because you have to make a gameplay consideration about your enemies. If it's big and slow and it takes a long time to kill and its attacks are brutal, it should also be slow. It should be a slow enemy that does not really, that you can use speed with. But to give that enemy and give it speed, and honestly give it maneuverability. I'm thinking of the giant fishmen in the Innsmouth village in the DLC. But also, it's not only fast and can attack multiple times in a row, it is absolutely and utterly vicious in that it can, attack over long stretches of area. It can really just, its attack is huge, but it can also attack. It can leap and jump and follow you very quickly, and it's really, really annoying. And I think that in Dark Souls you don't get as much of that. I really love the look of this weapon. It's got a really nasty, brutal kind of appearance to it. I don't think it's a realistic-looking weapon, and it always bothers me when they hold these swords right up next to their ear like this, because it looks good, but they'd probably cut their ear off or something accidentally, even though the back part of this is clearly dull, and only the front part is sharp. It's an excellent weapon. I think right now it's at a B scaling with strength, but I think it can get up to an A later on. And because I have such high strength, it's just an amazingly vicious weapon at this point in the game. I love looking up at the sky here and seeing that false sun. Now, I mentioned in the last episode that this area, the theory that we're going to this area if we listen to Frampt, is that somehow the daughter of Lord Gwyn, named Guinevere, is still alive and ruling over Anor Londo instead of her father, in her father's stead. However, we know that that's not true. That is not the case. Guinevere married another deity, I think the god of fire, and simply left. So where exactly she is, if she's dead, if she's just living somewhere else, who knows? But she is clearly no longer part of the scene in Anor Londo, and the only person that's running things is Guinevere's brother, Gwyndolin, who is masquerading as a woman. I mean, not masquerading, what am I saying? She's... This kick that this guy does, watch this for a second, that is amazing, that kung fu kick. That can really take a huge amount of health away from you. But we know that Gwyndolin is, either, I don't know how you want to phrase it, transgender, a transvestite, something like that. She identifies as a woman, in the parlance of our times, and for some reason or another still remains here as the hidden ruler over Anor Londo. But as I mentioned in the last episode, I don't know exactly the point of that. What is the purpose of her doing that? Does she just like lording it over this empty kingdom? And she is creating much of the enemies that we're fighting. Not all of them, but I think... Is it all of them? It might be all of the enemies in the area, aside from, say, the Mimics and the Titanite Demon. That said fatty ahead, and that lied, but it is interesting that you can see your enemy from up top, so it's not a total surprise. You just have to be aware of your surroundings. Not that it really helps or hinders you to see it. I mean, you're going to have to fight it anyway, and you're right next to a bonfire. What does it matter? But anyway, what Gwendolyn's motivations are, I'm not really sure. I'm going to have to try to research some of the lore about that to try to figure it out. But we do know this area I absolutely love because it reminds me of a sort of a more Asgard-like approach to deities, to gods. Planescape is one of my favorite campaign settings. It is my favorite campaign setting in all of Dungeons and Dragons. And one of the reasons is because the gods that they call the powers are not really acknowledged to be, I guess you could say, supernatural, or maybe they're shown not to be beyond the ken or knowledge generally of human beings. They're shown to kind of be just extreme, creatures like any other that have grown extraordinarily powerful, and that, they're not some sort of mystical, unknown presence that we tend to, with the kind of reverence that we usually treat deities. And that really reminds me of Norse mythology, because in that one, the gods were much more human than the Greek gods or the Mesopotamian gods. They really felt a lot more like they were just powerful, not exactly mortals, but powerful creatures that could still feel and act and live like human beings and still suffer like them. The Norse gods, you can see them being harmed by giants and other creatures, and at times they just feel more like adventurers in a way than they do like supernatural beings. I mean, they're immortal, obviously, but they're only immortal because they're eating the golden apples that they've found. That's, there's actually a story where they start to sicken and get close to old age and death because they're robbed of this magic item that makes them young. They feel more like regular creatures that have just attained this lucky break of being very, very strong. Like they're truly like they're 20th level heroes, to put it in AD&D terms or something like that. They've almost as the way we'd look at demigods in Greek mythology, like Perseus or Hercules, where they're clearly beyond human power, but they're not some sort of untouchable mystical creature that cannot be harmed. Another one of my favorite RPG games is Mask of the Betrayer, one of the expansion packs for Neverwinter Nights 2. I think it was one of the absolute best stories that I've ever seen in any video game ever. I absolutely love it, especially because it's talking about taking the fight to the gods themselves and trying to right an injustice that the gods themselves have perpetuated. And at the end of it, no matter how you play the game, you can't really win. You can't achieve the goal of the deity. You can only you can get close and you can fix your own personal problems, but once again, BioWare showed itself to be having a paucity of ideas in the execution of their story. I mean, the story itself was great and it was very well written, but ultimately I think it was poorly executed in the end. They felt beholden to follow D&D style rules about gods, and gods in D&D aren't really creatures that can be seriously harmed in that manner by humans, so you can't really hurt him. But in this game, it's very, very different. Clearly the gods are not human, they're giant, and maybe they were their own mortal race of creatures before they became known as gods to humans. But if you get strong enough, you can definitely kill the gods, and we sort of have to use their technology of soul usage in order to do it. And so that feels like a much more Norse sensibility to the entire world, and I love that. I'm just going to run over here and grab the Greatsword. This is the weapon used by Black Iron Tarkus. I'm going to be using this in the next episode, so I wanted to come pick it up. These little enemies here, I think are in some way, if I remember correctly, related to Gwendolyn. They really don't want them to be able to, they don't want you to be able to access the painted world of Ariamis for some reason or another. And it'd be very interesting to speculate why. I don't know what going to the I mean, I guess going to the Painted World of Ariamis gets us access to occult weaponry, which can kill the gods, but really that, that would make a lot more sense if you needed to use an occult weapon and otherwise you can't harm the gods. Sort of like how certain enemies in D&D can only be harmed by magic weapons or by fire attacks or something like that. And I'm trying to remember if those guys disappear too if we kill Guinevere. It's very hard to say. I don't think I've ever gone down there after killing Guinevere, now that I think about it. There's a very useful message there that said here. Wonderful. And I don't really care for, looking at them now, I don't really like the bloodstains in this game. They don't really look very good compared to, say, the messengers in Bloodborne. That looks a lot better. And I'm going to be going over here, and I'm actually going to die on this first attempt. I get killed on this first attempt trying to get across the 2 archers of Anor Londo. But I am also going to do... I die because I try to showcase something interesting that you can do that I heard about from someone else and just didn't believe, but I'll talk about that more in a second. I wanted to talk about which game is harder, Dark Souls or Bloodborne. In some ways, and there's no good answer, there's no one answer. Ultimately, both of the games are very difficult, and not one is harder than the other, really, I think, in the end of everything. More or less, I would say that Dark Souls is the harder game. Of course, this is very difficult to say because this is my first Souls game, and Bloodborne is my 4th Souls game, so I may just have gotten more used to the play style of how the game works, rather than, that I didn't have in my first run, so it's very difficult to know. But ultimately, I'd say that Dark Souls is a much harder game to traverse when it comes to the world, because you have these environmental obstacles like Sen's Fortress or the swamps of Blight Town, or these 2 archers of Anor Londo in particular are very bad. They are really, it's much harder to move about between different places rather than simply the enemies or the bosses being harder, because I think that in many ways the bosses in Bloodborne might actually be harder than the ones in Dark Souls. Again, it's hard to say because I've only played Bloodborne for about a month and a half now or so. So maybe I'll get really good at the bosses at some point, I don't know. But as far as I can tell, the bosses in Bloodborne are much more difficult because of their obnoxious, what I call their spaz attack style. I really, really dislike this spaz attack style, because I really shouldn't have killed these 2 gargoyles, by the way. I should have just run by, because I forgot that I could be hit by both of these guys and an archer at the same time, so I nearly died here. But the spaz attacks that these enemies do are sort of harken back to Demon Souls, when enemies like the goblins in the Valley of Defilement or the slave soldiers in Boletarian Palace would attack just by flailing their arms wildly in front of them multiple times to try to hit you. And for some reason they thought that was a good idea to bring back in Bloodborne, and I have no idea why they did that. And I'm just doing this. I said I wasn't going to use a shield in this run, but I'm going to show something that I did not believe you could do originally, but found out about later on that you could actually do, and I'm going to showcase it here poorly, and I die, unfortunately. But apparently you can actually parry great arrows. Now, unfortunately, you can't fully parry them. You can only get a partial parry on them. But, yeah, so that ultimately I think doesn't make sense. I wish that guy had been striking me there. I'm going to try to do it here. Yeah, you see I did that right there. And unfortunately died right afterward, but still. You can get a parry on one of these great arrows. And a partial parry is when you sort of... I'm just going to cut back here. A partial parry is when you sort of get a parry on an item. You just are a couple of seconds away from getting it right, but you're not far enough away to miss, so you actually don't get hit by the full force of the weapon and get hit by a modified smaller amount of its damage. And it's kind of an interesting little system they have in there, and I don't know quite why they included it. I wish you could fully parry these great arrows like this. That would make an interesting thing for PvP. and it would make this section potentially a lot easier, especially if you're an enemy. You know, if you maybe an idea would be that you can only fully parry an item with one of these special parrying shields, like the you could say the target shield or the buckler is the thing you can only those items you can use to fully parry something. So it gives you maybe a reason to use the lighter weapons here. I mean, there's a way to use them anyway, just to parry these attacks, but still. I really wish you could parry when you're holding a weapon two-handed here. And here we have our Sunbro. We're not going to be bringing Sunbro in to fight Ornstein and Smo, and that's going to be a later episode. I'm just going to finish up doing this area here. I think I'm going to max out at 40 endurance and maybe get all the way up to 50 strength, and probably leave my vitality at 20. That's what I'm thinking right now. This sword looks a bit too thick, like a lot of the bigger weapons in the game. Like it almost looks like it's made of stone. But I love, if you look at it closely, there are like cracks and grooves in it, and there's like bits of rust or blood on the. I think they say in the description is dried blood, but you can imagine it's rust or something like that. It reminds me a hell of a lot, this weapon, of the Pyramid Head's weapon from Silent Hill. And I just want to show in this little. You can see that there's an area behind here if you explore thoroughly, that there's a little section you can go to. So it's not entirely unknown to you. Although I just found the hidden area in here by accident. So, and I've seen people cosplay as Pyramid Head wearing this thing. It's pretty cool. But going back to what I was saying about Bloodborne, the bosses, mysteriously enough, have also brought about this weird, like, spaz attack ridiculousness, where they just flail their arms wildly. And I think we lose a chance to learn how the attack goes, how we're supposed to be fighting this, how we're supposed to be blocking and dodging and rolling out of the way, when everything is just this extremely frenetic, fast-paced flailing. You really can just sort of like wildly run around, and that's about it. You can't really, there's not much you can do, especially because you don't have a shield, to defend against it. You just have to sit there and, wildly charge away as much as you can. And I'm just probably going to end this episode by opening the door to the metal gate and the big door back to the oh my god, I'm blanking on this now. To the I guess what would you call it, like an audience chamber or the center of the Grand Cathedral there, where the sentinels are? Is that what you would call it? I'm not sure. Yeah, I guess that I'm not sure now that I'm thinking about it. But anyway, I'm probably just going to end it there and then start the next episode and do the entire painted world of Ariamis using Black Iron Tarkus's Greatsword. I thought it might be a little difficult to continue Sigmayr's questline here because I don't have a bow to lure out the Silver Knights, but I can actually kill these Silver Knights pretty quickly with this bigger, heavier weapon. And the attacks on this weapon are actually great. I actually like this in some ways. I like this a lot better than the Demon Great Machete, a lot better than the Great Axe, a lot better than a hell of a lot of other weapons. There's no point in collecting these coins, by the way. I can't feed them to Frampt because he is angry. He's getting pissy because we went and spoke to Kath before talking to him. I don't know why he's so angry at that, because it doesn't really seem to be that much of a difference at the end of the game for the primordial serpents, and there are a whole mess of them. Getting back to what I was saying about Gwendolyn, though, at the beginning of this episode, and her potential motivations for doing this, what is the point of trying to use your power and your authority in a dead world? Is there anything else for her to do or for her to gain in this world? I'm just going to show here that you can, a more proper version of this parrying I was talking about. Say, you still take a fair amount of damage, but it's a lot better than being knocked to the ground by this thing here. And eventually you would die if you just kept doing this ridiculously like I'm trying to do it. But, yeah, it's neat that you can do that. It's amazing that the style of gameplay is so sophisticated that I'm still learning things about it years after the game was made. And, that's really how I believe you should design a game. You should design the gameplay first, and then you should work on the story and everything after that. And that doesn't mean you're coming up with a bad story by any means. The game is the vehicle that takes you on the journey of the story. And if the vehicle is badly made and it doesn't really work properly and the gas mileage sucks, you're not going to want to drive in it. You have to want to engage in it. And I feel the same way, honestly, about literature. I think that the way in which you write should be as beautiful as you possibly can make it. You shouldn't just write randomly and hope that the content itself is worthwhile enough. You should write in such a way that it's a pleasure to read whatever it is you're writing about, and that'll continue to make you interested in what you're doing. If you write something that is, poorly written but has a good message, well, who cares? The same thing you can say about movies. Are you going to make a movie with some sort of poignant social message behind it and just rely on that? Of course not. The movie itself has to be worthwhile, because eventually, no matter how important you think X thing is, eventually that's going to be irrelevant. And that's going to be consigned to the past, and people are not going to be as interested in it anymore. If you take a look at a movie, say like The Killing Fields, or Salvador, or Platoon, these are about dead issues of the past, of the 1970s and 80s. They're no longer major political issues affecting the world anymore. They still affect the people that were directly involved in them, of course, but to the world outside of that, it's like, who cares? It's not like we need to worry about the Khmer Rouge or anything like that. But the movie The Killing Fields is such a great film that even, decades afterwards, when the Khmer Rouge is a distant memory for the most part, it's still worthwhile to watch. You're not watching it just in order to get this social message out. And I think that's happening more and more in video games, that people are trying to clamor, these ignorant idiots are trying to clamor for more, they want games to kind of grow up, or some sort of horrible, obnoxious, patronizing crap like that. And they want to tout games that are basically just really, really crummy, crudely designed things with, maybe a pathetically tacked on to the end sort of social message on it, and claim that that's good. And we see movies about that every year. Every single year, there's a movie that has the groundbreaking new film. And it's like, well, who gives a damn about that? I'm not interested in that. I want to see a good movie. And, it's not going to matter how groundbreaking the movie is 50 years from now, when, all of these social issues have totally changed and become completely different. It's just not going to matter at that era. There are a lot of movies like that, especially from the 1960s, during the counterculture era, where there are these movies that were made that were very much of their time and about the issues of their time, that are sort of irrelevant nowadays. And there are plenty of movies that were not well liked back in those days and were not seen to be directly related or referencing things that were going on in that era, but are still worthwhile today. Or maybe we even took a conservative line in that era, but are still worthwhile, even though they were proven wrong ultimately in the social category. And I don't want games to be like that in general. Don't think just about the story of the game. The first thing, the best thing you should be working on is the gameplay itself, and make sure that not only is it fun, but is it fun to do over and over and over and over again. And I'm not saying don't make a story around it. Of course you should have a story, a great story. But the first thing you should be worrying about is that vehicle. You should not be worrying about, what sort of social message the game has, or what the characters, how they interact with one another, or what that means. You should be worrying about what people are going to be doing 95% of the time, which is playing the damn game. And making it fun to actually play the game is going to make people want to learn about the story, and care about the story, and care about the characters. And sometimes games don't even need to have a great story in them, to be honest. They just need to have an interesting, fun gameplay and some basic characters. I mean, the characters of Link and Zelda are not especially great. But anyway, away from that digression, I'm probably going to be wearing that helmet in the next episode. That's why I bought it here. These little pink gargoyle guys are actually pretty tough because of their electricity attack, but this was something that really just was not done correctly in the game. There really are not enough enemies that have an electricity attack. There should be an electricity area somewhere in the game, where we have enemies that are primarily based around that, and this should be the area it is. And even though the halberds sort of have an electricity attack to them, it's not that big. Most of the time you can just run by the enemies here anyway. But, which is what I tend to do, but I decided to fight the giant just because I have this weapon that makes it a lot easier to do that. Just one two-handed R2 from this weapon, by the way, staggers those gargoyle guys. And I am out of Estus. I think that I'm just about ready to wrap this up. And tragically, I die at the end of this, those damn sentinels, because I forgot that the sentinels in this room, in this little audience chamber of the cathedral, or whatever you want to call it, these guys are different from the sentinels outside, and I would bet that they have more health. I know that they definitely have different attacks, because they can cast Wrath of the Gods, and they can heal themselves, something which I forgot when I was running towards the lever. Also, I mentioned this in my last playthrough, but whoever you are, if you write messages next to this lever, please stop interacting with other human beings ever, and just go away and live on an island somewhere so no one has to put up with your bullshit. No one is interested. I just wanted to add at the end here that I actually like the idea that brass or bronze is considered the items of the gods in sort of the way I like to think of it, like the Sumerians or the Egyptians are the very old race of people at the very end, at the very beginning of civilization, and maybe the Greeks and the Romans and the Persians kind of considered those guys to be the truly ancient world, thousands of years before even the classical world. And they sort of saw them, and they were sort of using brass and bronze as representative of that time period rather than the later iron or steel of the era of humans. And I died there. Wonderful. I'm probably going to just begin the next episode right in front of the Painted World of Ariamis, and I'll see you then.